Just joined us from the public. We have just commenced the meeting of the Minnesota Board of Pardons, consisting of myself, Attorney General Ellison, and Chief Justice Gilday. And we are now just beginning to hear the request for pardons extraordinary. The first one was a request for Max Mason, who was accused of a rape 100 years ago in Duluth. And we are going to hear from attorneys representing Mr. Mason and those wishing to speak to present before us. With that, Mr. Blackwell, you are recognized.
Thank you again, Governor, and good morning to you, Governor Walz, Chief Justice Gilday, General Ellison. I want to thank you all for this very important service you all provide for us as citizens of Minnesota and for our justice system. Again, I'm Jerry Blackwell of the Blackwell Burke Law Firm, along with Roger Gregoire from the Clayton Sachs McGee organization in Duluth, who will speak a few minutes after me. We make this pardon request on behalf of Max Mason. There are very few principles in our society more important than equal justice under the law. I'm here this morning in the hopes that you will use your pardon power to right a wrong of unequal justice from 100 years ago. But the circumstances surrounding that wrong make it as ripe as ever. As President Clinton said in granting a posthumous pardon in 1999 for Henry Flipper, although the wheels of justice turn slowly at times, still they turn. A pardon teaches us that time can heal old wounds and redemption comes to those who persist in a righteous cause. Most of all, it teaches us that we must never give up the fight to make our country, and I would add our state, live up to its highest ideals. We have not given up that fight for Max Mason, and I am a proponent of the highest ideals of justice for this state, as you all are. His case, like the case of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Emmett Till, Philando Castile, Jamar Clark, tens of thousands of other people of color, and even of Amy Cooper, a white woman dialing 911 to make a false racist report against a black man who was a bird watcher, they all have in common at the base of them a stereotypical and racist view of black men in America, that they are other, that they are dangerous, that they should be in prison, restrained, subjugated, overly policed, unduly stopped, searched, harassed, disregarded, or worse, as we have all recently seen on live television. They also have in common that they give rise to a common skepticism, if not cynicism, in the people, that the rule of law itself is hijacked by racism, and that it then plays a role in aiding and abetting the subjugation or killing of black and brown people with impunity, giving cover to what is wrong rather than moral justice for what is right. Each of you, in your commitments to serve, represent and are standard bearers for the highest ideals of justice in our state. You in your positions represent and embody the best in all of us. And it is my wish, and not just my wish, the wish of former pardon board members, the federal court, the black lawyers, leadership in Duluth, the JCRC, and others that you've heard from, that you will use this pardon opportunity for Max Mason to help restore confidence in the people, in the rule of law, in our justice process. A young white teenager, Irene Tuscan, in 1920, claimed to have been raped repeatedly by 5 or 6 young black men in town with a traveling circus. The story wasn't true and is widely discredited, as we all know. She was examined by her own family's physician within about 12 hours of the alleged attack, and he saw no evidence of any rape at all. He doubted her story, given how improbable that was. But this accusation of rape was first lobbed by her boyfriend and was never backed by physical evidence or witnesses at all, beyond the boyfriend and Miss Tuscan herself. Emerald Jackson, Elias Clayton, and Isaac McGee were 3 young black men among the several thrown in jail for the accusation. And they were violently and lawlessly broken out of jail, beaten, and lynched from a street light pole on June 15th by a white mob in a hideous display of what's bad in humanity. It was before 10,000 white onlookers. It was in this atmosphere of racial terrorism and prejudice that another young black circus employee named Max Mason was arrested and convicted of raping Miss Tuscan. He was sentenced up to 30 years of hard labor in Stillwater Prison. 4 years of his life were wrongfully taken away in prison, after which He was paroled on the condition that he not return to the state of Minnesota, at least not for 16 years. He was banished. Now, Ms. Tuscan's family representative supports this pardon application for Max Mason, as you saw in the letter of support from St. Louis County Attorney Mark Rubin. So, shining the spotlight on our criminal justice system, what do we see from this tragedy in Duluth? Equal justice means getting the same thing at the same time in the same place. So Justice Thurgood Marshall told us. 10,000 whites witnessed these 3 murders. What was the equal justice? Nobody was tried. Nobody was convicted. Nobody was held accountable for the racist terrorism inflicted and the killing of multiple, yes, unarmed black men. In contrast, 4 black men paid with their very lives based overwhelmingly on an implausible claim of victimhood by a white woman and the fortuity of having been born black and passing through Duluth at the wrong time. I'm talking here about a history that does not go away until it is set right. Max Mason's story is a part of the Duluth tragedy story, and it is a history that does not go away until it is set right. Mr. Mason was a victim of that very atmosphere of racial terrorism and a criminal justice process that was biased against him and that failed him. We ask that he be granted a posthumous pardon extraordinary because his criminal justice process, from the first encounter with the police all the way through to his parole, was tainted and fairly characterized as racist and racially biased. With nothing but the accusation and claim of innocence by a white woman and her boyfriend, no different than Amy Cooper's 911 call, but without a cell phone, the chief of police in Duluth, Chief Murphy, and Duluth police officers pulled all the black men from their sleeping cars on the departing train from Duluth, holding that conduct up against our state's highest ideals for justice. Just look at this process. Innocent until proven guilty? Here's what Chief Murphy got on the train and said to the black workers. I want to talk to every nigger that was idle between 9 and 10 o'clock last night. Now, I'm not using the language he used because it's civil. I'm using the language because it's ugly and it's raw. And that racism, whatever it might be as outward, thin veneer of civility, is ugly and it's raw. What was said to Max Mason? What was said to Max Mason was, get out of here. You black son of a bitch, you, is what the police said to Max Mason, innocent until proven guilty. They couldn't make any identification of Max Mason as having been anyone who had done anything, though they tried early in the morning on June 15th. So Max Mason traveled on to Virginia, Minnesota, and they then arrested him again later in the day. He was apprehended a second time. And how did they approach him then, innocent until proven guilty? Well, a Duluth police officer pointed a pistol at him saying, talk, let's have the whole story. When he said he didn't know anything, the officer said, oh, you know plenty, all right. If you don't talk, I'll kill you. The cop then cocked the pistol and momentarily held it to Mason's ear before putting his gun away. Now, I wished I could stop there, but it doesn't stop there. The Duluth Safety Commissioner, William Murnian, when the mob was growing outside the jail on the night of June 15th, he issued an order. He had issued an order earlier that day that no clubs, no guns could be used against the all-white mob. He said, I don't want to see the blood of one white person spill for these 6 niggers. Equal protection under the law? What about the trial? Look at the DA's closing arguments. And you all know this, but in his closing argument, the district attorney, Warren Green, told the jury that this case was the most important one that he had ever brought into court. Why do we have mobs, he asked. It is because people think the Negroes won't be convicted. That's why they take the law into their own hands. People of Duluth and St. Louis County want to know that through your verdict, that when a white girl is ravished by a white man, and the man is proven guilty, as in this case, the man is going to be found guilty. Now, as Justice Gilday well knows, that there have been new trials ordered where prosecutors interjected race into closing arguments. In the case of State versus Cabrera in 2005, the Supreme Court said that affirming a conviction where the prosecutor behaved that way would undermine our strong commitment to rooting out bias, no matter how subtle, indirect, or veiled. And there was nothing subtle about this at all. You all know that the trial judge, after the trial, in reflecting on the evidence and urging Max Mason's parole, said essentially that he didn't believe there had been enough evidence provided to this jury to have convicted Max Mason, and that he would have taken it away from the jury and ordered a new trial, but for there being questions he wanted answered by the Minnesota Supreme Court. The district attorney acknowledged that the outcome was racially biased. He wrote after the trial, the successor district attorney. He was district attorney, I think, just a couple of years after the one who tried this case. He wrote and he said that he did not believe that Max Mason would have been convicted had he been white. So why is it? Why should we, as Minnesotans, or even you as our pardon board, be proud of this process for what it says about us, held up against the light of our highest ideals for justice? Isn't it just possible, though probable, that precious years of Max Mason's short lifespan were taken away from him by our criminal justice process that failed him and took 40 up to 40-something years away that he had on this planet? He died in his 40s. Next to perjury, prejudice in our justice system is the main cause of miscarriages of justice in America. Mr. Mason deserves our mercy, our clemency, because we served him a tainted justice when it should have been pure. A tainted justice is necessarily injustice. In fairness to him, in allegiance to our ideals for justice, we didn't do right by him, and a pardon is all that we can do right now to make it right. A pardon extraordinary. You have that authority. Clear his name and his memory. But there is one other reason to grant this pardon, and I will just talk about it very briefly. And it is for the public welfare, to affirm this state's commitment to equal justice and the rule of law. You all, the trusted leadership of our state, have an opportunity right now, looking back at Mr. Mason and looking forward at the same call for racial equity in the administration of justice today. You have the opportunity to make the statement that we are better than this. This tragedy does not belong only to Duluth. As in the words of James Baldwin, no public and social disaster is the result of only a single demented creature, or municipality. It comes from a culture. It comes from institutional support. It comes from the support of laws. It comes from the support of governmental entities. It belongs to all of us. Grant Max Mason's pardon because the rule of law matters. Equal justice matters. It matters to correct this wrong of history, to help restore and maintain confidence in our criminal justice system today that has been lost and is marching our streets right now in protest. It matters to say that we are serious about needed reforms. President Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon so that the country could get on past Watergate and to unify the nation, but Nixon had been dead wrong. The pardon provision in our Constitution is virtually identical, adopted from the same federal provision. Surely the interest in restoring confidence in our justice system here in Minnesota is every bit as compelling a reason to grant a pardon. And unlike President Nixon, Max Mason does not believe to have done anything wrong. So you have seen the letters of support. I won't mention those or go through those again. And so if it pleases the panel, I would like to give a few moments for Mr. Roger Gregoire to address the panel, the pardon board.
Mr. Gregoire, you are recognized.
My testimony in this proceeding is a subtle one. I'm a member of the board of the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial. Am I being heard clearly?
Yes, sir.
Good, thank you. The subtlety lies in a very peculiar, ubiquitous comment that we all know. It's called Minnesota Nice. It's that effort on the part of Minnesotans to hold even the most fragile thread of contrary advice just to keep a balance of things, just to say, well, perhaps it did happen. The only real evidence against Clayton, Jackson, and McGee and their supposed attack on Ms. Tuscan is the conviction of Max. That conviction needs to be set aside, not simply because, or importantly because it sets aside the legal system itself, but because it withdraws from the minds of many Minnesotans the fragility of the notion was a crime committed. And no matter how thin and frail that particular notion is, that sense that in fact Clayton, Jackson, and McGee ought to have been lynched anyway, they should have been killed for whatever reason this fiction took place. We need to remove that. We need to remove that from the minds of all of those people in Minnesota and across the world who believe that there's some thread of support for the notion that there might have been a crime. And the only evidence of that frailty is in the conviction of Max Mason. That needs to be erased completely, so that the minds of those people who hold dearly onto Minnesota Nice and the balance of contrary evidence that keeps things in some sort of equipoise can be set aside. We need desperately to help those who want to abandon the racism of that fiction so that Max Mason his memory can be held in all of our hearts in a clear and innocent way. But most of all, it will help all of those people in Minnesota who still hold on to the notion that there might have been a crime. We need to remove that evidence from their minds so they can no longer reference the possibility for their own racism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Griswold. At this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Mike Tuscan, the current chief of police in the city of Duluth and the grandnephew of Irene Tuscan. Mr. Tuscan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Governor Walz. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Mike Tuscan. I am my aunt was the late great aunt Irene Tuscan. I have had the occasion to meet her, but never learned about her involvement in this tragic lynchings of June 15th, 1920 until after her death, and when my mother told me about the year of 2000. I believe this is mostly attributed to the great shame experienced by our family and the desire to repress and forget this injustice. In much the same way, Duluth followed suit. I have an interest in this case for the following reasons. I am a member of the Tuscan family. I serve as the police chief for the Duluth Police Department. And finally, it's incumbent upon me as a police chief and as a citizen to seek and find justice. What I do know about the tragedies of June 15, 1920 is based upon reading the book, The Lynchings in Duluth, the documentation associated with this pardon, and also information passed on to me by my mother, Donna Tuscan, who learned about these events when she married into the family by the matriarch, my grandmother, Gladys Tuscan, who lived from 1913 to 1999. She was the wife of Walter Tuscan, my grandfather. Walter Tuscan was the brother of Irene Tuscan. My mother had few facts about the tragic incident, except to share that my Aunt Irene had reported a rape leading to the lynching of Mr. Clayton, Mr. Jackson, and Mr. McGee. And she was told explicitly at that time by my grandmother, Gladys, that she was never to speak about the matter again. My mother told me when the name of Irene Tuscan was about to be made public around the year of 2000. And again, this family secret, I think, demonstrated the depth of shame in our family. Irene Tuscan spent the last years of her life after having a stroke in a nursing home, incapable of speech and unable to reconcile the facts or atone for her role in the lynching or wrongful conviction of Max Mason. As a police officer for 28 years and serving as police chief for nearly the last 5, I can only say that the actions and investigation conducted by the Duluth Police Department, from the report of the rape by Mr. Sullivan and Irene Tuscan, and the multiple arrests and detentions of dozens of African-American men, including Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, Isaac McGee, and Max Mason, ignored the facts and relied wholly upon speculation, conjecture, and intimidation. The statements of fact by Mr. Blackwell today demonstrate the interest of justice pursued by the Duluth Police Department, from the police chief to police officer, represented an abomination and disgrace of the police profession and a total disregard for justice. The calculus used to build a case was based upon the desperation to make an arrest to hold someone, anyone, accountable, regardless of facts of the evidence in the case. I will offer today not only is the conviction unjust, but the facts lack the basis for an arrest in the first place. It is said justice delayed is justice denied. Justice was denied Mr. Max Mason during his lifetime, but this board has an opportunity to right this wrong today. The great Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. In the recent weeks, we have seen an injustice at the hands of those who are sworn to serve and protect in the murder of George Floyd. Never has there been a time that we must work relentlessly in our fervent pursuit to seek and find justice than today. Please pardon Max Mason and begin the healing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Tuscan. Mr. Gregoire, Mr. Blackwell, thank you all for your eloquent and passionate call for justice and to the conscience of a state that is in the midst of soul searching like we have never seen. To the people listening, I'd like you to know that the folks on this call, this has been decades in the making of moving for a pardon or a correcting of this record. This is not something new. And the Pardon Board scheduled today's hearing and brought Max Mason onto the agenda over 6 months ago, not knowing that we would see the murder of George Floyd in the meantime. I don't believe anything happens by chance. I believe we've been given this opportunity, and I would ask my fellow members of the Pardon Board to think deeply on this and understand the implications involved with clearing Max Mason's name, but moving, as Mr. Gregoire said, from that Minnesota nice piece of not wanting to see conflict to facing these issues before they come back again. With that, I would ask Attorney General Ellison for any comments or questions of our 3 presenters.
Yes, Governor, thank you very much. I absolutely intend to vote yes. I'm grateful for the chance to do so. I just want to note that this particular application, critical to the name of Max Mason, also critical to our state, as the very 3 eloquent presenters said, Mrs. Blackwell, Gregoire, and Tuscan. This has implications for an individual, but also for our entire community. And long before the events of the last 2 weeks ever transpired, we were contemplating this specific petition. And so I want anyone listening to really pay due regard to your comment, which is this is not some late moment attempt to be a balm or a salve to 100-year-old injustice. We've been working on this for a while, and I just want to say thanks to everybody who's been part of it, including the Duluth committee that has been working on the memorial, the 100-year memorial, who's been very busy for quite a long time. I'll also share with everybody that myself and Mr. Blackwell made a trip down to what's known as the Lynching Museum to see the display there, and I would urge any Minnesotan to go down there because it shows just coffin after coffin of people who were lynched. And they're not all from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, which is where my family originally comes from. They're also from Duluth, Minnesota, St. Louis County, and there is a space right there. And I think it's important for us to know that that racial terror is not limited to one section of our country. It may have taken place more frequently in some places, but there's not an inch of our country that doesn't need to address this critical issue, including our own state. I say that, and it's already in the record, but I just want to say, Governor, that I'm very proud to see letters from St. Louis County Attorney Mark Rubin, letters from Duluth Mayor Emily Larson, letters from the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers, letters of support from the Twin Cities Cardozo Society and the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. I want to say thank you for who submitted letters like Walter Mondale, Arnie Carlson, Al Huey, Mark Dayton, Tim Palente, Kathleen Blatz, Russell Anderson, Eric Magnuson, Mike Hatch, Skip Humphrey, and Lori Swanson. I also want to say thank you to Judge John Thunheim for submitting a letter. I think that the letter submitted by Artika Roller of the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault is very important. She notes that Irene Tuscan never received any kind of victim-centered response, which may have helped avert this crisis in the first place. Within a male-dominated world, she got swept up in this thing, and I'm not saying that she doesn't have responsibility, she does, but I'm also saying that there were countervailing forces that for a woman in the 1920s made it very difficult for her to stand up and say, you know what, this didn't really happen. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. I want to note, too, that the Minnesota State Board Bar Association, Tom Nelson, has a letter of support. And he wrote a very important piece for this. The Minnesota American Civil Liberties Union submitted. State legislators from the area, Jen Schultz and Liz Olson, submitted documents, and the list goes on and on. I guess I just want to make it clear to everyone listening that this is a process that began long before the events of the last 2 weeks, that this is a pardon supported by a diverse group of people, Black and white and other, supported members of the Tuscan family, supported by a wide range. And this is something that as a society, as a community, as a state, we are committed to. And I just think I want everybody to know who's listening, this is not just something to say, okay, we did this, now we're done. No, we're going to do this, and we're going to remain and continue to be committed to a just, fair, equal society through the long term. This is not a one and done. This is part of a process of actually allowing our country to really be a nation of liberty and justice for all. So I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, General Ellison. Chief Justice Gilday, you are recognized.
Thank you, Governor. I want to thank our presenters. I don't have any questions for them or comments. Governor, do you want to address would it be appropriate for me to talk about the authority question, or how do you want to proceed?
Sure, if you would like to, I am prepared with the determination of the authority to grant the posthumous pardon, but you are welcome to proceed, Chief Justice.
I agree with you, Governor. I mean, the broad statutory language, I think, does give the board the power to grant a posthumous pardon. I mean, and the legislature says any person is a very broad term, of course, the use of any. And so I do agree that the board has the power to grant a posthumous pardon, and I do intend to vote for the pardon today.
Thank you, Chief Justice. Again, I want to associate myself with the presenter's remarks as well as Attorney General Ellison. This is 100 years overdue. By not addressing this, it continued the systemic racism. It allowed things to happen that have happened. There is a direct line between what happened with Max Mason and Clayton, Jackson, and McGee. There's a direct line to what happened to George Floyd on the streets of Minneapolis. And the inability for us to address this stain on the soul of our state for so long has led to those situations. I appreciate the Attorney General's comments, because I think for so many listening, for so long, had it not been for the work of people that you heard here today, many people had no idea there was a lynching. We could clear our soul by believing those happened in the southern states, and we were progressive and enlightened Northerners who sent our troops to Gettysburg to defend the Union, while 60 years later, we were lynching black men without trial and without conscience. So I too intend to vote for this, but I want to make it known that the timing is for a reason. It was decades in the making. And I also want to give a special thank you to Chief Tuscan, who represents what community service looks like, what policing with the community and the conscience looks like. I am incredibly proud of the work that he and his officers do, and his courage with his family involved in this and coming forward. I cannot understate the healing that that does at this point in time. So Chief Tuscan, you have my deepest appreciation and gratitude for your courage and your professionalism. With that, if there are no further questions, I would call for a roll call vote of the members of this, whether to grant the pardon requested by Mr. Max Mason. Attorney General Ellison, how do you vote?
Absolutely.
Chief Justice Gilday, how do you vote?
Grant.
I, Governor Walz, vote in favor of granting this pardon. Mr. Max Mason's pardon is granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
At this time, I would ask the next applicant, Ms. Karen Swanson, to please introduce yourself. And to those listening, I would ask our technology will bring folks on.
Hi, my name is Karen Swanson, and I'm looking for a